Chapter 1. The Humiliation in the Living Room. For 8 long years, I told myself that keeping the peace was worth the silence, that opening our doors to our son and his wife was an act of love that would one day be appreciated. But the illusion shattered the morning I found Carol, my wife of nearly 5 decades, on the floor, with tears in her eyes, tulips scattered around her, while our daughter-in-law stood above her, holding the baby and spitting the word filthy, as if she owned not just the room, but our lives. My name is Richard Miller, and in that instant I knew this was no longer about family struggles. It was about survival dignity, and the fight to reclaim the home and the marriage we had built with our own hands. I was sitting in my armchair by the window, the same chair I had used for nearly 3 decades, the newspaper folded in my lap, but unread. The Miller house in Portland had always been my sanctuary, filled with the rhythm of Carol's footsteps and the soft hum of her voice when she worked in the kitchen. That morning she was tidying the counters, moving with the same quiet grace she always carried. At 72, she still moved with a grace that drew me back to the day I first saw her in college. The light coming in through the blinds caught the silver in her hair, and for a moment I felt grateful for the life we had built together. Our son David was upstairs with Emily, his wife of 6 years. They had been living under our roof for far longer than we ever planned. When they moved in back in 2012, I told myself it would be temporary, just a year or two, until they could get back on their feet. 8 years had gone by. Carol and I had adjusted because that is what parents do, but lately the weight of their presence felt heavier. The baby had arrived only 3 days earlier. The whole house had shifted into a tense quiet, every step, every breath monitored by Emily's strict rules. I wanted to believe her demands came from exhaustion, but I had seen too many small moments to know better. She corrected Carol's cooking, rearranged our living room furniture without asking, and treated every suggestion from us like interference. That morning, the baby let out a sharp cry from the living room. Carol put the vase down and smiled at me as she brushed her hands on her apron. I could see the joy in her eyes. She had spent weeks preparing for this child, folding tiny onesies, stacking diapers, humming lullabies when she thought no one was listening. She walked into the living room, her steps soft across the hardwood floor. Emily's voice cut through the air. "Richard, tell Carol to keep it down. The baby needs his rest." I lowered my newspaper and listened. Carol had hardly made a sound. The only noise was the faint clink of the vase against the table. Carol took another step forward, probably hoping to offer help. She loved the baby already. You could see it in the way her hands hovered near the cradle, careful but eager. That was when I heard it. A dull thud, a gasp, and the sound of water splashing. I dropped the newspaper and rushed into the living room. Carol was on the floor, her knees bent awkwardly, the tulips scattered across the rug, water soaking into the fibers. She looked stunned, her eyes wide, her cheeks flushed with shame. Emily stood over her, holding Lucas in her arms, her face twisted with fury. "Don't touch him, you're filthy." The words hit me like a fist. My wife, the woman who had raised David with patience and love, who had opened her home and her heart to this family, was sitting on the ground being called filthy. The room went silent. Even the baby stopped crying. Carol's hand shook as she reached for the flowers, her dignity crumbling with every petal she tried to gather. Emily stood like a queen, guarding her throne, satisfied in her power. I bent down beside Carol, helping her to her feet. My voice came out calm, though my chest was burning. "Let me help you." She looked at me with eyes full of sadness. This was not the Carol I married, the Carol who laughed freely, who filled our home with warmth. This was a woman diminished, beaten down by years of criticism. I turned my head and caught something in Emily's expression. She was pleased. She was enjoying the humiliation she had inflicted. David appeared in the doorway, his hands in his pockets, his shoulders stiff. He looked uneasy, but not surprised. "Dad." "Emily is just protective," he said weakly. "New mothers can be on edge." "Protective," I repeated silently. Protecting a child by shoving his grandmother to the ground and spitting words that cut deeper than any blow. Emily shifted Lucas in her arms, her chin lifted. "Actually, David and I were just saying that maybe it would be better if Carol stayed upstairs when the baby is in the main areas. For hygiene. Hygiene. About my wife. In our own home." I waited for David to defend his mother, but he avoided my eyes. I helped Carol pick up the last of the tulips, her hands trembling against mine. She excused herself softly and walked toward the bedroom to change her wet clothes. When the door closed behind her, the silence pressed down on me. 8 years of small slights, quiet corrections, and unspoken boundaries suddenly sharpened into focus. I had been blind, or perhaps I had chosen not to see. But this moment, Carol on the floor with tears in her eyes and Emily standing triumphant, made it impossible to ignore. I looked around the room at the furniture Emily had rearranged, at the shelves she had reorganized, at the way every trace of Carol's presence seemed to have been pushed aside. My home no longer felt like mine. My wife no longer felt like herself. Something broke inside me. It was more than anger, more than heartbreak. It was the realization that I had allowed this woman to rewrite the rules of our house, and in doing so, I had let my wife fade into the background. I watched David step toward Emily, his hand brushing her shoulder in a gesture of support. She smirked at me as if to say she had won. In that moment, I knew things would never return to the way they were. This was no longer just about keeping the peace or helping our son. It was about reclaiming the dignity of my wife, the sanctity of our home, and the respect that had been stripped away piece by piece. The sound of Carol's bedroom door closing upstairs lingered in my mind. I sat back in the chair, my hands clenched tight. For 8 years, I had been patient, too patient. Now, watching the woman I loved humiliated in her own living room, I felt something shift inside me, a quiet decision forming. This could not continue. It had to stop, and I would be the one to stop it. The house was silent again, except for the faint sound of the baby stirring in Emily's arms. She rocked him with a satisfied look while David stood awkwardly by her side. I stayed seated, staring at the water stains spreading across the rug, the petals scattered like evidence of everything that had gone wrong. The day had begun like any other, but in that single moment, in that single insult, everything I thought I knew about my family, my marriage, and my home had changed. Chapter 2. Cracks in the Family. I found David in what used to be my study, now crowded with baby supplies and boxes of clothes. He was leaning against the dresser, rocking Lucas in his arms, his face tired but not ashamed. I shut the door behind me and waited until he looked up. "Your mother was shoved to the ground today," I said quietly. "She was called filthy in her own home. Are you really going to stand there and tell me that is just a misunderstanding?" David shifted his eyes on the baby instead of me. "Dad, Emily is under pressure. She has barely slept in days. She is only protecting the baby. Mom is older now. She forgets things, sometimes does things the old way. Emily is just being careful." "Careful," I repeated, my voice tightening. "I saw her push your mother. There was no mistake. She wanted Carol on the floor. She wanted her humiliated." David winced and turned his shoulder. "It is not like that. You are blowing it out of proportion." I felt my chest burn with a mix of disbelief and sorrow. "When was the last time you saw your mother sit in her favorite chair without Emily saying it looked wrong? When was the last time she cooked a meal without Emily complaining it was too salty or too bland? When was the last time she spoke at dinner without being corrected?" He said nothing. The baby made a soft cooing noise, unaware of the war already brewing around him. I stepped closer. "You were raised in this house. Your mother worked herself tired to give you every chance, and now she cannot even walk into her own kitchen without being told she is in the way." David rubbed his forehead. "Dad, you do not understand. Things are different now. Emily has read the books, she follows the guidelines. She knows what she is doing." "She is not running a laboratory," I said. "She is raising a child in our home, and in the process she is pushing your mother out of every corner of her life." His jaw tightened. "We are just trying to do what is best for our family." I let the words hang in the air. Our family, I thought, as if Carol and I had been erased from that picture. Later that night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Memories surfaced unbidden. Carol standing at the stove being told her meals were too heavy, too outdated. Carol setting the table only to be corrected on the placement of the forks. Carol quietly excusing herself from the living room because Emily had taken her chair and told her the lighting was better there. Each moment alone seemed small, but strung together they painted a clear picture of exile. The next afternoon, David left the house to meet a friend. I overheard his voice before he stepped out, low and uneasy. It was Tom Reynolds, his old college buddy. They were standing in the driveway, the sun slanting across the hood of David's beat-up Honda. Tom laughed too loudly. "Still living at your parents' place. You are 36, man. At some point, you have to stand on your own." David muttered something about the economy, about saving money. Tom shook his head. "Come on, Dave. People talk. You are a married man with a kid, and you are living off your parents." I saw the red in David's face even from the porch. He snapped back, but his voice cracked with shame. Tom only chuckled and clapped him on the shoulder before walking away. David stood there for a long time before getting in the car, his shoulders heavy with the weight of ridicule. I returned inside unsettled. That sting of humiliation could have been the jolt he needed, but I feared Emily's hold on him was stronger. That evening, Emily stood at the bottom of the staircase with Lucas on her hip. Her eyes were sharp, her tone coated in honey. Richard, I was thinking, with the baby needing quiet, it might be better if Carol spends more time upstairs. The downstairs is really David's family space now. The words landed with a chill. Carol, who had lived here for more than 40 years, was being told she should stay hidden away like a guest. I looked at Emily, my jaw tight. This is our house. Carol belongs wherever she wants to be. She smiled thinly, rocking the baby. Of course, but you know it is about hygiene, about what is best for Lucas. I did not respond. I felt the rage simmering, but I held it in, not for her sake, but for mine. In that moment, I understood this was not about rules for a newborn. This was about control. She was carving out territory floor by floor, room by room, until nothing would be left for Carol or for me. Later that night, Carol sat beside me in bed silent, her hands folded in her lap. She did not need to speak. I could see it in her eyes, the quiet resignation, the weight of being pushed out of her own home. I reached for her hand and held it tightly, the silence between us filled with promises I had yet to keep. Downstairs, the house was still, but the echo of Emily's words lingered. Stay upstairs. The downstairs belongs to David's family. It was not just bad manners. It was a takeover, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. Chapter 3. Shocking Evidence. One afternoon, I stood in the hallway, half hidden by the edge of the dining room wall, when I heard Emily's voice rise with unusual cheer. She was on the phone, pacing near the living room window, her words clear enough for me to catch each one. It's perfect, she said, almost laughing. Free house, free food, built-in babysitting. It is like hitting the lottery. My stomach tightened. I stayed still listening as she bragged, her voice light and confident, so different from the sharp tone she used with us. She told whoever was on the line that she had everything just the way she wanted it, that Carol mostly stayed upstairs now, and that I was easy to manage. She even said David did whatever she told him. The laughter that followed chilled me. I walked back into the kitchen, my hands clenched. Carol looked up from the sink, her face soft with the effort of keeping calm, though I could see the tiredness behind her eyes. I wanted to tell her what I had heard, but the words stuck in my throat. That night, after Carol had gone to bed, I sat at my desk in the small room upstairs that still held a few of my old files. I pulled open a drawer that I had not touched in months. The folders smelled faintly of dust and old paper. I was looking for our insurance policy, but what I found made my hands freeze. There was a stack of envelopes neatly bound with a rubber band. I slid them free and read the names across the top. Electric service, water, internet. All addressed not to me or Carol, but to Emily Hart. The earliest date was from the spring of 2018. My pulse raced as I flipped through bill after bill, each one with our address but her name. She had been paying them in her own name for more than 2 years without a single word to us. I pulled out my phone and searched my email, hoping I had overlooked digital statements, but there was nothing. I had assumed the paper bills had stopped because of online billing. Now I realized they had not stopped. They had been redirected. The next morning, I set the stack on the kitchen table in front of Carol. Her hands trembled as she lifted the top envelope. "Richard, what does this mean?" I told her what I had found. Her face drained of color. She pressed her fingers to her lips and whispered, "She is trying to make it look like she lives here as the owner." I nodded grimly, but there was more I needed to know. I went to the mailbox that afternoon and looked closely at the envelopes inside. 2 of them were addressed to E. Hart at our address, mixed in with a single piece of mail for me. I had never noticed before, had never paid attention to the small print. I drove straight to the post office downtown. At the counter, I asked to verify our address records. The clerk typed into the computer and then looked up. "There is an active mail forwarding request here, started in 2019. It directs mail for this address to go under the name Emily Hart." My knees felt weak. I thanked the clerk and walked outside into the drizzle, my head spinning. That evening, Carol sat at the dining table staring at the stack of bills. She whispered that she had not seen a single utility bill in more than a year and had assumed I was paying them online. Her eyes welled with tears. "Richard, she is trying to take the house." I reached across the table and took her hand, though my own shook with anger. She is laying the groundwork, I said. She wants to establish this place as hers. Utilities mail everything. The weight of it settled over us both. Carol pulled her sweater tighter and looked toward the staircase as if Emily might already be listening. For a moment, the silence in the house was unbearable. I rose and walked to the living room, staring at the framed photos along the wall, our wedding picture, David as a boy, the family vacations. All of it was in danger of being rewritten, replaced with a new story where Emily claimed what we had built. I could still hear her voice from that phone call light with amusement, declaring our generosity a lottery win. I realized then that she had never intended to leave, not after the first year, not ever. Each step had been calculated, each small shift designed to erase us. I stood there until the light outside faded and the house grew dark. Upstairs, Carol closed the bedroom door. Downstairs, Emily hummed to the baby, her tune sharp and false. The realization pressed down on me. She was not just rude or controlling. She was methodically building a case, a foundation of paper and proof to stake a claim to our home. And for the first time, I saw clearly that she might succeed if I did nothing. Chapter 4. The Law Steps In. I called Robert Patterson first thing the next morning, and he told me to come by his office near Pioneer Courthouse Square. The elevator ride felt slow and stale, and I could see my reflection in the brass doors, older than I remembered, jaw set like stone. Robert met me in the hallway with a tired smile and a firm handshake. He had the same careful eyes he carried when we were young teachers trying to keep order in noisy classrooms. We sat at a small round table by his window, and I laid out everything I knew, the utility bills in Emily's name, the mail forwarding the way she pushed Carol, and then claimed it was about hygiene, the phone call where she bragged that our house was a lottery ticket. Robert listened without interrupting, his hands folded, his head tilted as if catching every note in a song. When I finished, he took a breath and spoke slowly. "Family arrangements get messy under Oregon law," he said. "If you invite someone to live in your home, they often gain rights similar to a tenant at will. That means you cannot simply tell them to leave tomorrow. You have to follow notice requirements and legal process. And if she has been paying utilities in her own name, she will try to spin that as proof of residence and contribution. It does not give her ownership, but it complicates the story." I felt heat rise in my chest and asked about ownership, asked if she could claim the house outright. "Not from bills and mail," he said, shaking his head. "Ownership is title and deed. But there is something else she might try." People throw around the phrase sweat equity. It is not magic, but a lawyer could argue that her labor and time created equitable interest. In practice, it rarely wins against a recorded deed held by owners who can show they never intended to transfer any share. Still, she could use it to stall, to force a settlement, to make your life hard. "What do we do?" I asked. "I want her out, but I do not want to break the law or lose my house." He nodded. "First, no self-help, no changing locks, no cutting off utilities, no confrontations that can be twisted into harassment. Second, document everything. Keep dates, names, conversations, screenshots, photographs. Third, we will serve a written notice revoking permission to occupy certain areas and ultimately a notice to vacate. The timeline depends on facts, but we can craft the strongest lawful path. Fourth, contact USPS to reverse any mail direction and notify the utilities that you are the owner and account holder of record. Fifth, secure your title documents and financial papers in a safe place outside the house. Finally, expect pushback. She will posture. She may hire counsel. Do not engage alone. Route communications through me." I felt steadier with each step he listed. He slid a legal pad toward me and wrote down a sequence with dates and tasks, and I copied them into my pocket notebook with a pen that dug hard into the paper. When I stood to leave, he gripped my shoulder and held my eyes. "Protect Carol," he said. "Keep her out of arguments. Let me carry the legal part." On the drive home, the rain started, that Portland drizzle that smudges the world without washing it clean. I pulled into our driveway and sat for a moment, hands on the wheel, listening to the soft drum on the windshield. I thought of Carol folding baby clothes with a smile that never asked for anything in return. I thought of how easily kindness can be mistaken for weakness, how quickly a door left open becomes a door taken. That evening, Carol went to choir practice at church. She has always found peace in those wooden pews and soft hymns. When she returned, her face was pale and guarded. We sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light humming. She told me she had spoken with Pastor Helen in a quiet corner of the fellowship hall. She told her everything, the shove, the words, the way Emily had claimed the downstairs. Pastor Helen listened, and then she lowered her voice and said that people in the congregation had started to whisper. They had seen Emily talking as if our house belonged to her, as if she were the lady of the manor and we were boarders. Carol's voice shook when she repeated that. She said she felt like a stranger in a town she had lived in for 40 years. I reached across the table and took her hand. I told her I had seen Robert and that we had a plan. She nodded, but the shame lingered in her eyes, a bruise that would not fade. She said Pastor Helen offered to write down what she had heard and seen, to be a witness if it came to that. That kindness steadied Carol a little. She said the choir director asked if she would take the solo for the Easter service, and for the first time all week she smiled. After dinner, Carol went upstairs to sort documents. Robert's warning about securing papers had lit a small fire in her. I stayed downstairs listening for any sound from the living room. David was out with Tom, and Emily had retreated to the nursery with Lucas. The house felt split down its center, two quiets that did not touch. A few minutes later, I heard Carol call my name from the top of the stairs, not loud but urgent. I took the steps two at a time. She was in the small office we had carved out of the spare bedroom, the file cabinet open, manila folders stacked on the desk. She held a thick document in both hands, and I saw at once that the edges were too crisp to be old. She placed it on the desk and smoothed it flat. It was a quitclaim deed form, the kind you can download and fill in, but this one had notes in the margins. In slanted blue ink, someone had written our address, the parcel number, the assessed value from the county website, and a rough calculation of property taxes. The handwriting was not mine, and it was not Carol's. She had drawn a small arrow from the line that said "Grantor" to a scribble that matched the way Emily signed her name on birthday cards. Carol had seen it often enough to know. I felt the air leave my lungs. The page was not executed, not notarized, but it was a blueprint. It was not theory, it was intention. I ran my finger over the ink as if touching it would explain how far this had gone. Carol stood very still beside me, her arms wrapped around her middle, like she was trying to keep something inside from breaking open. "How long has this been in here?" I asked. She shook her head and said she did not know. She had been organizing the tax folders when the corner of this form slipped out from behind our title documents. It must have been tucked there on purpose. We stared at the open drawer, at the quiet, ordinary shape of our life folded into paper and metal, and I felt a cold clarity take hold. I took photos of the form with my phone front and back, then slid it into a plastic sleeve and locked it in the safe we kept under the bed. I texted Robert that I had found a partial quitclaim deed with notations in Emily's handwriting and asked if I should bring it first thing. He replied a few minutes later and told me to guard the original and come by in the morning, and that we were moving from concern to action. Downstairs, the house was still. A lullaby drifted faintly from the nursery, bright and sweet on the surface, sharp to my ears. I closed the office drawer and turned off the light. Carol and I stood in the hallway together, not speaking, each of us holding a piece of what the other could not say. The path ahead was no longer blurred. It was marked in bills and envelopes, and a form that should never have existed, leading straight to a door I had no choice but to open. Chapter 5. The Mask Slips. The next morning I came downstairs with the file folder tucked under my arm, the weight of it pressing against my ribs like a secret I could no longer keep. Emily was in the kitchen humming to Lucas while she stirred a pot of oatmeal. Carol sat at the far end of the table, her shoulders hunched, her eyes lowered as if bracing herself for another day of quiet insults. I laid the folder on the table and slid it across the surface until it rested in front of Emily. She glanced down, her humming stopped, and then she looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "What is this, Stephen?" she asked, her voice light and cautious. "You tell me," I answered. She opened the folder and saw the utility bills, the mail forwarding, print out the quitclaim deed with her handwriting in the margins. For a brief second, her face hardened, the mask slipping enough for me to see calculation in her eyes. Then she let out a small laugh, shaking her head. "This is a misunderstanding. I was only trying to help keep things organized." Carol's voice was quiet but steady. "For 2 years you've had the bills in your name. You never mentioned it once." Emily tilted her head, feigning surprise. "Time flies. With the baby and everything, I must have forgotten to switch them back." David walked in, then rubbing the sleep from his eyes, and froze when he saw the papers spread across the table. "Dad, what's going on?" I looked straight at him. "Your wife has been setting up a paper trail to make it look like this house belongs to her." David frowned, glancing between us. "Emily, is that true?" She pressed a hand to her chest, her voice rising in mock offense. "Of course not. Your father is exaggerating. These are just household details I managed because they were falling through the cracks. For 8 years, Carol whispered, I've been told I was in the way, that I didn't know how to do things properly. Now I see why. David picked up one of the bills and studied it. Emily, why is your name on all of these? Her smile faltered. I already explained. It was easier. You never cared about paperwork anyway. But in his eyes, I could see something shift. Doubt. The tension carried over to Sunday when we attended a family barbecue at my cousin Mark's place. The yard was filled with the smell of charcoal and laughter, but beneath it all ran a current of unease. Mark poured me a beer, leaned close, and said loud enough for others to hear, Sounds like Emily's running your whole house now. Probably got her name on the deed, too. The laughter that followed stung more than the alcohol in my throat. Carol's cheeks burned red, and she excused herself, slipping inside to help with the food. I stood in the grass, the weight of humiliation pressing down on me, while Emily smiled sweetly at the group, saying nothing to correct them. On the drive home, Carol sat silently staring out the window. Every mile deepened my determination. This was not just carelessness. It was strategy. That evening, I asked David to sit down with us in the living room. Emily stood by the fireplace holding Lucas, her chin lifted in defiance. David, I said your mother and I have let you live here for 8 years. We did it out of love. But your wife has crossed a line. These documents prove she is trying to position herself as the owner of our house. Emily's voice sharpened. That's ridiculous. I've lived here 8 years, Stephen. 8 years of keeping this place running, managing the bills, caring for the baby. I have equal rights now. David flinched. Equal rights. Yes, she said, her voice rising. This house only works because I manage it. Without me, everything would fall apart. I deserve a stake. The words hung in the air like smoke after a firecracker. Carol's face crumpled. David sat back, his mouth opening, then closing, unable to find words. I kept my gaze steady on Emily, not blinking. You've mistaken hospitality for ownership, I said finally. This is not your house! Emily clutched the baby tighter, and her voice shook with anger. Maybe not on paper, but in every other way that matters. This is my home. The silence that followed was heavier than any shouting. I could see David's hands trembling where they rested on his knees. He looked at his wife, then at me, then down at the carpet, as if the truth lay hidden in its fibers. I thought of Mark's mocking words at the barbecue, of Carol's bowed shoulders, of the papers upstairs locked in my safe. The mask had slipped, and beneath it there was no pretense left. Emily believed she had earned our house, and she was bold enough to declare it out loud. That night I lay awake beside Carol, listening to her steady breathing. My mind replayed Emily's words, each one a spark feeding a fire I could no longer put out. She had revealed herself, and now there was no going back. Chapter 6. Courtroom Shocks. Robert moved quickly once I handed him the folder. Within 2 days, he had filed a formal notice on our behalf demanding Emily return all utility accounts to my name and cancel the mail forwarding with the post office. He drafted it in language so clear there could be no mistake, a letter that said in firm print what I had been shouting inside my head for months. When he slid a copy across his desk to me, I felt a strange relief, like someone had finally lit a flare in the darkness. Emily did not speak to me for 3 days after the notice arrived. She moved around the house with a stiff back, whispering to David, clutching Lucas as if the child were a shield. I tried not to engage her. Robert's words echoed in my mind. No shouting, no threats. Let the paper speak. Then the summons for a preliminary hearing came in the mail, official and heavy. The date was set for early spring at the Multnomah County Courthouse. I polished my shoes the night before as Carol laid out a navy dress she had not worn in years. We moved quietly around each other, careful like soldiers preparing for battle. The morning of the hearing, I sat in the courtroom beside Carol while Robert organized his notes. Across the aisle, Emily perched next to a man in a tailored gray suit, her attorney. David sat behind them, his face pale, his hands folded in his lap. Emily's eyes never met mine. She looked straight ahead with a small smile that struck me as rehearsed. Judge Linda Cooper entered, her black robe flowing as she took her seat. She had the stern face of someone who had seen every kind of family dispute. She asked Robert to begin. He stood, outlined the notice we had filed, the evidence of utilities in Emily's name, the mail forwarding request, the quitclaim deed with her handwriting. He spoke with calm precision, presenting each item as a piece of a puzzle that formed a clear picture. When he finished, Emily's lawyer rose, He was smooth, almost casual, addressing the judge as though this were an everyday misunderstanding. He said Emily had lived in the Miller home for over 8 years, that she had contributed her time and labor to maintain it, that she had paid bills faithfully. He used the phrase sweat equity more than once, explaining that her long-term residency and work gave her equitable interest. He argued that any attempt to remove her was unfair, that she was being treated as an intruder rather than family. Carol's hand tightened around mine as the words filled the room. My stomach twisted. For a moment, I wondered if the judge would believe him. The language was slippery, dressed in fairness, and it unsettled me. Judge Cooper held up her hand. "This is a preliminary hearing," she said. "I am not deciding ownership today. I will require both sides to present further evidence. Documentation of accounts, records of payments, witness statements. Until then, all parties are ordered to maintain the peace and refrain from harassment." The gavel struck once sharp in the silence. Carol's shoulders slumped with relief and fear tangled together. Robert leaned toward me and whispered, "This is expected. Do not let it shake you." That night the house was heavy with tension. Emily stayed upstairs and David lingered in the garage. I walked the yard alone, the damp spring air clinging to my jacket. I tried to breathe to steady myself, but the image of her lawyer's confident face would not leave me. A few days later, I overheard something that gave me new fire. David had gone to meet Tom Reynolds at a bar near downtown. I only learned what happened because Tom called me the next morning, half apologetic. He said David had looked beaten, that when Tom teased him for still living off us, David had snapped. Tom admitted he had said, "Some engineer, you are letting your wife try to steal your parents' house." David had flushed red, nearly thrown his drink, then stormed out. Tom thought I should know. When David returned that night, his eyes were glassy, his face tight. He avoided me, went straight upstairs, and closed the door. I stood at the bottom of the stairs, listening to the creak of the floorboards above, wondering how much shame it would take before he opened his eyes. Later that week, while sorting through more papers in the office, I uncovered something that froze me where I stood. In the back of a drawer was a folded sheet with notes scrawled in Emily's handwriting. At first, I thought it was another bill, but as I spread it flat, I realized it was a worksheet from the county assessor's office. Property details, square footage, parcel boundaries, tax estimates. At the bottom was a signature line, but the name written there was not an employee. It was a man I had never heard of, and when I looked him up, no such assessor existed. I traced the edges of the paper with my finger and felt a chill. Emily had allowed a stranger into our home, someone pretending to be an official to collect information about our property. It was not only manipulation, it was deception bordering on fraud. I locked the sheet in the safe with the other documents, my pulse pounding in my ears. The path was clear now. She was not going to stop, and she was not afraid of crossing legal lines to get what she wanted. When I returned to the kitchen, Carol was folding laundry at the table, her hands slow and weary. I did not tell her yet. The sight of her bent over those small clothes for Lucas broke something in me. She had given her life to this family, and still she was treated as an obstacle. I placed a hand on her shoulder, and she looked up with a tired smile. Tomorrow, I thought, Robert will see this, and then there will be no denying just how far Emily had gone. Chapter 7. David's Choice. I waited until David came home from work search that Friday, his shoulders sagging as he dropped his jacket on the chair by the door. I asked him to sit with me in the office upstairs. He frowned but followed, dragging his feet like a boy summoned for discipline. Carol lingered in the hallway, her hands pressed together, her eyes full of hope and fear. I opened the safe and pulled out the folded worksheet, the one with the false signature. I laid it flat on the desk. David glanced at it, then back at me, confused. "Look closely," I told him. "This is not county paperwork. It is a copy made to look official. That name at the bottom does not exist. Your wife let a fake assessor into our house to collect this information." His brow furrowed as he bent over the page. His face paled as recognition sank in. He rubbed his jaw, staring at the handwriting in the margins. Emily's notes were there clear as day. "Dad," he whispered, his voice breaking. "She told me it was routine, just someone verifying property records." "It was not routine," I said. "It was fraud." He dropped into the chair, the paper limp in his hands. Betrayal flickered in his eyes, the same shock I had felt when I first uncovered it. He shook his head slowly, as if denying would change the truth. The door opened and Emily walked in, carrying Lucas on her hip. She saw the paper and her face hardened instantly. "Give that back," she snapped. "That is private." David looked at her, his hands trembling. "What did you do, Emily? Who did you bring into this house?" She set Lucas in the crib in the corner and folded her arms. "Do not twist this. I did what I had to do for our future." David's voice rose louder than I had ever heard it. "Our future. You lied to me. You lied to my parents." Emily's eyes narrowed. "If you do not stand with me, you will regret it. I will take Lucas and you will never see him again. Neither of you will." Carol gasped softly from the hallway. My heart pounded as I stepped forward ready to speak, but I held my tongue. This was David's battle now. David stood, his hands clenched. Tom's words must have echoed in his mind, the sting of being mocked as a weak man living under his parents' roof. He looked at Emily as if seeing her for the first time, not as his wife, but as the stranger she had become. "You are not taking him," David said firmly. "You are not taking my son from me or from them." Emily laughed bitterly. "Try to stop me. I have lived here 8 years. I have just as much claim as they do." "No," David said, his voice shaking but strong. "This house is theirs. It has always been theirs. And you crossed a line." Her face flushed with fury. "You will regret this." David turned to me, his shoulders squared for the first time in years. "Dad, call Robert. I am filing for divorce. I am fighting for custody." The room fell silent except for Lucas stirring in his crib. Carol's tears slipped down her cheeks, not from sorrow but from release. Emily's hands balled into fists, her chest heaving. "You cannot do this," she hissed. I stepped forward, then my voice steady, my eyes locked on hers. "This stops now." The words cut through the air with a finality that silenced even the baby. David did not look away. Carol's breath steadied. Emily's glare sharpened, but behind it I saw the first flicker of fear. The mask was gone, the threats exposed. There was no more room for pretending, no more space for excuses. The choice had been made, and this time it was David's, not mine. We stood in that room together, father, mother, son, and the woman who had tried to tear us apart, the air heavy with everything said and unsaid. For the first time in years, I felt the ground beneath my feet hold firm. The fight was far from over, but the line had been drawn, and David was finally standing on the right side of it. Chapter 8. Justice and New Beginnings. The courtroom was packed on the final day of the hearing. The spring sun spilled through the tall windows of the Multnomah County Courthouse, dust drifting in the light as if the air itself held its breath. Carol sat to my right, her hands folded tightly together, her face pale but steady. David sat in front of us with Robert, his back straight, his eyes fixed forward. Across the aisle, Emily leaned toward her attorney, her hair perfectly in place, her expression carved from stone. Judge Linda Cooper entered, and the room hushed. She scanned the file in front of her, then looked over her glasses at both sides. "I have considered the evidence," she said. "Utility accounts transferred without consent, a false mail forwarding request, the attempted use of an unofficial assessor. The pattern is clear." Carol's fingers squeezed mine until they ached. David's jaw tightened. Emily's lawyer whispered something to her, but she shook her head, her lips pressed tight. The judge continued. "Emily Hart, you are found guilty of fraud and misrepresentation. You are sentenced to 2 years of probation. During this time, you will not be permitted unsupervised access to the minor child, Lucas Miller. All visitation will be supervised at a county facility or by an approved third party. Custody of Lucas is awarded to his father, David Miller." The gavel struck once. Carol exhaled a sob she had been holding in for months. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the words settle. The fight that had consumed our lives was finally given shape and judgment. Emily's face twisted, her eyes darting toward David. She reached for him, but he pulled his arm away. The bailiff stepped closer, guiding her back toward the benches. The mask of control she had worn so long had shattered in front of everyone. Outside the courthouse, David turned to us. His voice was low, almost broken. "I should have seen it sooner." "You see it now," I said. "That is enough." The weeks that followed carried a kind of quiet I had not known in years. Carol returned to the choir at St. Andrew's Church, her voice strong and clear in rehearsals. I stood in the back pew one evening, listening as she sang the opening notes of an old hymn. Her shoulders were lifted, her eyes bright, and for the first time in years she looked unburdened. Lucas toddled through our garden in the afternoons, chasing butterflies, his laughter carrying across the yard. Carol knelt beside him, showing him how to water the flowers. His small hand gripped hers, splashing water across her dress, and she only laughed. The house, once filled with tension, now held the sound of a child's joy. One Sunday, we hosted the family for dinner. Cousin Mark arrived with his wife, his usual swagger subdued. After grace was said, he cleared his throat and looked directly at Carol. "I was wrong to make jokes," he admitted. "I did not know what you were going through. You held your dignity when I gave you none. I am sorry." Carol nodded gently, her eyes soft but firm. "Thank you, Mark. That means more than you know." Pastor Helen stopped by a week later bringing a basket of bread from the church bake sale. She hugged Carol and told her how proud she was. "You found your voice," she said, "not just for yourself, but for your family." By 2023, David had saved enough to buy a small house 4 blocks away on a quiet, tree-lined street. It was not grand, but it was his. Lucas, now riding a bright red bicycle, pedaled down the sidewalk each afternoon, racing toward our driveway with a grin. Carol would wait on the porch, waving as he came, her laughter echoing through the yard. As for Emily, word reached us through the courthouse records. She remarried a man she had met online, moved into his apartment across town. But whispers said he was strict, controlling, unwilling to give her the freedom she once demanded. Her life, once driven by ambition to claim what was ours, had turned into a cage of her own making. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the yard glowed gold, I sat in my chair by the window, watching Lucas chase fireflies. Carol hummed in the kitchen, her voice floating through the open door. David stood by the fence, calling encouragement to his son. I thought of the long months of anger and fear, the nights when I wondered if we would ever reclaim our home. Sometimes it takes only a few words to mark a line that cannot be crossed. I whispered them again under my breath, steady and certain. "This stops now." And with that, the house settled into peace, not perfect, not free of scars, but ours again, stronger than before. Today, 8 years under our roof. One shocking betrayal tore the family apart. Thum nigh. 8 years of silence shattered when she called my wife filthy in our own home. But the game she played with paper and power turned into a battle no one saw coming. What hides behind a closed door can tear a family apart. Mota. 8 years under one roof ended in shocking betrayal when a daughter-in-law humiliated her mother-in-law and tried to seize the family home. This gripping revenge family drama unfolds with lies, paperwork, and a courtroom battle worthy of a viral Reddit story. Betrayal cuts deep, but justice has its way. Watch how dignity, karma, and courage turn the tide in this unforgettable tale.